Over the past 2,000 years, billions of people have placed their faith in these words. Sacred words, believed to carry a direct message from the Almighty. But what if I told you that what we read today isn't exactly what was originally written? This isn't a theory. This isn't a conspiracy. This is the result of decades of serious research by some of the world's leading scholars in ancient languages and biblical studies. Just one mistranslated word can completely change the meaning of a sentence. A misunderstood sentence can reshape an entire doctrine, and a distorted doctrine can redefine the faith of millions. In this video, we'll explore 3 of the most shocking revelations about Bible translations. The word hell, a concept that has haunted humanity for 2 millennia, may have been mistranslated from its original text. One of Christianity's core doctrines might be based on a misunderstanding of ancient Hebrew. And our very understanding of the nature of God may have been influenced by political decisions made in the Middle Ages. But before we dive into these discoveries, we need to understand the process of translating the Bible, a 2,000-year journey spanning countless languages, cultures, and political pressures. Many assume the Bible was translated directly from the original text into modern English. But the truth is far more complex. Every translation is shaped by its era, by those in power, and sometimes by personal agendas. When scholars began comparing the oldest known manuscripts with modern translations, they uncovered shocking discrepancies. Not just minor mistranslations, but changes that could completely alter how we understand faith itself. In the next few minutes, we'll examine 3 of the most significant mistranslated passages and their impact. Investigate the motives behind these translation choices. And most importantly, uncover the true meaning of these passages in their original languages. But be prepared. After this video, you may never see the Bible the same way again. Because the truth, though sometimes unsettling, is always worth discovering. And perhaps it's time to confront the toughest question of all. Do we truly understand God's message? Or are we simply believing what others want us to believe? The Bible is not a single book. It's a collection of texts written over more than 1,000 years by various authors in vastly different historical contexts. The Old Testament, the oldest part of the Bible, was primarily written in Hebrew, with portions in Aramaic, a language widely spoken in ancient Mesopotamia. These texts, written between approximately 1200 and 165 BCE, document the history, laws, and prophecies of ancient Israel. Every letter in ancient Hebrew carries profound, multi-layered meanings. A single word can hold multiple interpretations, depending on the context and how it's understood. The New Testament, written in the 1st century CE, was composed in Koine Greek, the common trade language of the era. This was the language of philosophy, literature, and commerce throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. But then came a monumental challenge. How could the intricate meanings of these texts be conveyed in other languages? In the 4th century, Saint Jerome undertook the task of translating the entire Bible into Latin, a project that took him 23 years. Jerome's Vulgate translation became the standard text of the Roman Catholic Church for over a millennium. Yet even Jerome himself acknowledged the immense difficulties of translation. If I translate word for word, the result will be unintelligible. If I am forced to alter the structure or words, I will seem to betray the original text. In c. 325 CE, the Council of Nicaea convened bishops to unify doctrine. Their decisions not only influenced biblical interpretation, but also shaped how the texts would be translated in the future. As the Bible began to be translated into English, each translation reflected its own era. Tyndale's translation, 1526, came at the cost of the translator's life. The King James Version, 1611, was created to reinforce royal authority. Consider this specific example. The Hebrew word yichel can mean either palace or temple. When translated into Latin, it became templum, and in English, simply temple. Part of the original nuance was lost. This raises a critical question. If even a simple word can lose so much meaning, what has happened to more complex concepts like sin, salvation, or heaven? Today, we have hundreds of different Bible translations, each attempting to balance accuracy to the original with accessibility for modern readers. But is this enough? Because behind these linguistic shifts lies a much larger story, a story of power, control, and messages that may have been deliberately altered. And that is precisely what we'll uncover next. When studying the history of Bible translation, one cannot help but ask, what truly influenced the decisions of the translators? And were those decisions always driven by the goal of conveying the original meaning as accurately as possible? Let's travel back to the 4th century CE. The Roman Empire was undergoing monumental changes. Emperor Constantine had declared Christianity the state religion. But a unified religion required a unified message. For emperors and the church, spreading the faith wasn't the only priority. They needed a tool to consolidate power. And the Bible, as the most sacred text, became that tool. Bible translations often reflected the will of those in authority. For example, the King James Version was not just a translation, it was a political statement, emphasizing royal authority and social order in line with the monarchy's agenda. But political power wasn't the only obstacle. Language itself posed insurmountable challenges. Ancient Hebrew, with its unique grammatical structure and rich metaphors, often lacked direct equivalents in Latin or modern languages. Take the Hebrew word chesed as an example. It's a complex concept that encompasses love, loyalty, and kindness, but no single word in any other language fully captures its depth. Cultural barriers added yet another layer of complexity. How do you explain the concept of heaven to cultures with no tradition of an afterlife? Or sin in societies with entirely different moral frameworks? Religious institutions also exerted significant influence. Each denomination sought translations that aligned with its doctrines, leading to subtle yet impactful changes in wording and interpretation. Some changes might seem minor, but were pivotal. Choosing one word over another could completely alter the understanding of a doctrine. And as these small changes accumulated, they could create significant shifts in how faith was perceived. What's troubling is that many of these changes weren't accidental. They reflected the biases and agendas of their time. And once a particular phrasing was accepted, it was often repeated in later translations, without question. Thus, every Bible translation is the product of a complex web of influences: political power, linguistic limitations, cultural differences, and religious pressure. The critical question remains, how have these influences altered the original message? In the next section, we'll delve into 3 specific examples, 3 passages that have been most significantly distorted throughout history, and what we uncover may challenge everything you've ever believed. In modern Bible translations, every time we read about hell, the word used is often hell, but this may be one of the most far-reaching translation errors in the history of religion. In the original Hebrew text, the term used is Gai ben Hayanum, or in Greek, Gehenna. This wasn't an abstract concept of hell, but a real location, the Valley of Hinnom, situated south of ancient Jerusalem. This valley carries a particularly dark history. In the Old Testament, it was the site of child sacrifices to the Canaanite god Molech. King Josiah of Judah ended this horrific practice by turning the valley into a garbage dump for the city. The waste was continually burned, creating a scene of perpetual fire and smoke. When Jesus used the word Gehenna in his teachings, the Jews of his time knew exactly what he was referring to. It was a vivid, tangible symbol of destruction and purification, something they could witness daily from the city of Jerusalem. The problem began when the Bible was translated into Greek and Latin. Gehenna became infernum in the Latin Vulgate, a term evocative of the underworld in Greco-Roman mythology. When translated into English, it became hell, a concept heavily influenced by Norse mythology's Helheim, the realm of the dead. This mistranslation, combined with medieval literature and art, most notably Dante's Divine Comedy, gave rise to an entirely new image of hell, a place of eternal torment, with fire, demons, and unending punishment. Let's break this down. First, it's a distortion of meaning. What was once a specific physical symbol of purification, a real tangible image, was transformed into something abstract, an idea of eternal punishment. Second, it became a tool for control. This new image of hell was used as a powerful instrument for fear, allowing the medieval church to reinforce its authority over the people. And finally, a theological shift. The original message about purification and repentance was replaced by a doctrine of irrevocable condemnation. Today, the Valley of Hinnom is a peaceful park in Jerusalem. But the legacy of this mistranslation profoundly affects how we understand sin, salvation, and the nature of God. Did Jesus, when using the image of a burning trash heap to illustrate purification, ever imagine it would evolve into a doctrine of eternal torture? And this is just one example of how a single mistranslation can completely reshape our perception of faith and God. One of the most famous prophecies in the Bible is found in Isaiah 7:14. This passage has become foundational for the doctrine of the virgin birth of Jesus. But is this truly what the original text intended? In the original Hebrew, the word used is almah. Hebrew language scholars point out that this term simply means young woman or maiden of marriageable age. It does not necessarily imply virginity. In fact, almah appears 7 times in the Old Testament, and in most other instances it is translated as young woman or maiden. If the Hebrew authors had intended to emphasize virginity specifically, they would likely have used the word tolah, which explicitly means virgin. The significant shift occurred when the Bible was translated into Greek in the Septuagint around the 3rd century BCE. The translators chose the word parthenos to render almah. While parthenos is often understood to mean virgin in ancient Greek, it could also simply mean young woman. As Christianity grew, this mistranslation became the basis for one of its most important doctrines, the virgin birth of Jesus. The Latin Vulgate continued this tradition by using the word virgo, and subsequent English translations followed suit with the word virgin. In its original context, this prophecy referred to a specific event during the reign of King Ahaz in the 8th century BCE. The young woman may have been a particular individual known to both the prophet and the king, signifying a child whose birth would serve as a sign in their immediate historical context. This mistranslation has had profound implications. It created an expectation of a miraculous virgin birth in the New Testament narratives. It contributed to the development of the doctrine of the perpetual virginity of Mary. It influenced Christian perspectives on sexuality and purity. Over the centuries, the image of the Virgin Mary has become a powerful symbol in Christian art and culture. However, modern scholars now question whether we have imposed a meaning onto the original text that was never there. This does not necessarily diminish the Christian faith in the birth of Jesus. Rather, it highlights how translations can evolve and shape doctrines over time. And it raises a crucial question: should we reevaluate how we interpret sacred texts in light of their historical and linguistic origins? The mistranslation of the word almah has shown us how a single word can profoundly influence doctrine and belief. But there is another phrase, perhaps even more controversial and impactful: in the image of God. From the very first chapters of the Bible, this phrase has shaped humanity's understanding of itself and its relationship with the Creator. In Hebrew, the phrase is b'tselem Elohim. Tselem is often translated as image, but in the context of the ancient Near East, the term carried a much richer and more complex meaning. In ancient civilizations like Egypt and Babylon, the concept of being in the image of the gods had a very specific connotation. Kings were considered the image of the gods, the exclusive representatives of divine authority on earth. This justified their absolute rule. Therefore, when the Genesis text declares that all humanity is created in the image of God, it was a revolutionary statement. It shattered the prevailing notion that only royalty embodied divine representation. asserting instead that every human being bears this divine imprint. However, as this phrase was translated into Greek, Latin, and later European languages, its revolutionary implications began to diminish. Within the hierarchical societies of medieval Europe, it was interpreted in ways that reinforced existing power structures. The church and nobility often used this phrase to justify their privileged positions. They argued that certain people reflected the image of God more clearly than others, providing a theological basis for social and religious hierarchies. The ramifications of this misinterpretation were enormous. It was used to justify monarchic rule, claiming the divine right of kings, that their authority to govern came directly from God. It strengthened the church's power, allowing it to position itself as the sole interpreter of God's will, claiming a closer connection to the divine image. And perhaps most troubling, it created a social hierarchy where some were seen as being closer to God than others, a system that perpetuated inequality for centuries. It wasn't until the Protestant Reformation and later the Enlightenment that the original egalitarian intent of B'Tselem Elohim began to be rediscovered. Reformers emphasized that all individuals could have direct access to God, challenging the monopoly of the church and monarchy on divine representation. Perhaps it is time to revisit the original meaning of B'Tselem Elohim, not as a tool to establish power, but as a bold affirmation of the equality and dignity of all people. These three examples, Gehenna, almah, and B'Tselem Elohim, illustrate how translations and interpretations can profoundly alter not only the meaning of sacred texts, but also the very structure of society and religion. By uncovering these historical and linguistic shifts, we open the door to a deeper and more authentic understanding of faith, one that reconnects us with the transformative power of the original message. To truly understand an ancient text, we cannot simply read the words. We must immerse ourselves in the world in which those words were written. Take Gehenna, for example. To a first-century Jew, hearing this word would not evoke an abstract hell. They envisioned a real valley filled with rising smoke from burning trash, a vivid symbol of purification and destruction. Cultural context is equally crucial. When the Hebrew authors used the word almah, they were employing a term from their everyday language. It carried cultural and social meanings that cannot be fully conveyed through a straightforward translation. The Bible was written in a world vastly different from our own, a world of ancient empires, vanished cultures, and cosmologies that diverged fundamentally from our modern understanding. When we read about being made in the image of God, we need to recognize that in the ancient world, this concept carried immense political and social weight. It directly challenged the power systems of empires, where only kings were seen as embodying the divine image. The process of translation has gradually stripped away these layers of meaning. Each translation is an attempt to communicate the text's essence to a new language and culture. But in doing so, many nuances and depths are inevitably lost. These shifts in understanding are not just academic concerns. They've profoundly shaped how millions of people perceive God and practice their faith. Let's take a closer look. First, the hell narrative. The idea of hell as a place of eternal torment became a powerful tool of control. It provided the foundation for doctrines of everlasting punishment, but this diverged completely from the original message of purification and transformation. Next, virginity and Mary. The emphasis on Mary's virginity has influenced not only theology, but also Christian views on women and sexuality. It created expectations and moral standards that may not reflect the original intent of the text. And finally, the image of God. Misinterpretations of being in the image of God reinforced religious and social hierarchies. It was used to justify the dominance of certain individuals or classes over others, a perspective that directly opposed the original egalitarian message. What should we do with these new understandings? First, we must acknowledge that interpreting the Bible accurately requires more than reading modern translations. Thanks to technology and contemporary research methods, we now have unprecedented access to the original meanings of these ancient texts. We can learn from scholars, use research tools, and explore the historical context in greater depth than ever before. Most importantly, we need to remember this: seeking the truth does not weaken faith, it strengthens it. When we grasp the original messages, we can rediscover their depth and their revolutionary potential. Perhaps it's time to ask ourselves, if we could return to the original meanings of these sacred texts, could that not only transform how we understand faith, but also how we live it? The journey to uncover the truth about Bible translations has revealed astonishing insights. What we've learned is not just a story about language. It's a story about how humanity understands God, faith, and itself. We've seen how a real place, the Valley of Gehenna, transformed into an abstract concept of eternal hell. We've witnessed how almah, a word meaning young woman, became the foundation for one of Christianity's most significant doctrines. And we've understood how the phrase, "in the image of God," was misinterpreted to uphold power structures rather than declare equality. But the most important lesson we've learned is the role of context. Every word in the Bible was written at a specific time, for a specific audience, with distinct cultural and social meanings. When we ignore this context, we don't just lose meaning, we risk creating entirely new ones. What should we do with these revelations? First, we must have the courage to ask questions. The courage to acknowledge that what we believe may not be what was originally written. The courage to seek truth, even when it challenges long-held beliefs. There are many ways to begin this journey. Explore the Dead Sea Scrolls. Study the Septuagint. Learn about the history and culture of the ancient world. Join discussions about the original meanings of the Bible. But most importantly, share these discoveries. Create spaces for open and honest conversations about faith. Because truth is not a threat to faith, it's the foundation for building a stronger, more authentic faith. 2,000 years is a long time for truths to remain buried, but it is never too late to unearth them. In the end, the question is not, do we dare confront the truth? But rather, do we dare live with a faith rooted in that truth?